Welcome everybody. Part 3 today of the Midi webinar, where we're going to talk a little bit more about getting Midi in and out of Allen Heath devices. We have Florian Bomers with us from Bome Software, and we have pre-recorded an interview, which we're going to show you a little bit later. But first of all, we're going to start with explaining a little bit more about how we getting Midi in and out of Allen Heath devices. If there are any questions, there is a Q&A where you can type your questions and we can answer them in the end, because there's a Q&A on the end. And if there are anything else, please lower or raise your hand and ask a question. First of all, I would like to say that this is part 3 of the Midi webinar. And last week, my colleague, Alex Skinner, did a fantastic job on explaining the Midi basics, on what the coding is and how you interpreted all the Midi commands, and especially aimed at all the Allen Heath devices. It's a real good one to watch. You can go to our YouTube channel and watch the webinar from Alex and see what he has to tell you. And if you're a bit like me, I always need to refresh my stuff when we're talking Midi again. So it's always good to have a very good webinar about that one. So all the basics are there, and we're going to talk today a little bit more about how to get Midi in and out of our devices. So all our digital products support Midi over Ethernet. So we don't use the 5-pin Ethernet port anymore. We transport everything over Ethernet. And we've chosen Midi over Ethernet instead of 5-pin because all of our devices are networkable. And it's easier to get Midi over Ethernet in and out devices than to get stuck with all the 5-pin connectors. Midi is a simple 7 or 8-bit serial string, and we can transport the serial string over Ethernet. So it's also quite simple to use other devices than Midi devices to send or receive Midi commands to one of our mixers or matrix mixers. So simple programs that can spit out serial commands through a specific port on a specific IP address can communicate with all our devices. So SQ and Q on top of that Midi over Ethernet also support Midi over USB. So a simple USB cable, it's not the USB port on the front of the mixer, but the USB-B port on the back of the mixer, that will help you to get Midi in and out of a Q or an SQ mixer. And I think Keith is with us somewhere. So if there are any questions on Midi over USB, we can even wheel in Keith if we need to. So all this Midi over Ethernet is nice, but how do we get messages in and out of our Allen Heath devices? So there are a few ways to achieve it, to get Midi in and out. One is a simple one, which is our Midi control driver, which is downloadable from our website. Any product page where you see the software tab, there's also a tab that says Midi control driver. And in the Midi control driver, we can choose what mixer we are using. So D-Live, Q, SQ, Avantis, or AHM. And we can choose different protocols. So the protocols are defining what we are going to do with the Midi signal. And then, of course, we can connect through the physical Midi ports when you have USB connections or TCP/IP. And on AHM, and maybe in the future on other products, we also have a secure TCP/IP connection. So if you have a situation where you need to have security or you need to have an SSL certificate on your Midi communication, you can add this to your system. So the driver works with Q, SQ, Avantis, D-Live, and AHM. And there's a choice to make a connection over USB, which was said before, only available for SQ and Q. The TCP/IP connection, or you can have the TCP connection on a secure one. The secure connection is a nice one where you need to create an SSL certificate, which you can create on external websites. And an SSL certificate is a way to make a secure connection. So the certificate tells the connection that we have a connection which is acceptable by both the devices. And if you are a larger company, your company probably will have an SSL certificate in-house or an SSL server in-house, which will supply your system for it. Then we have a few types of protocols. One of them is UE, and one of them is Midi Control. And they look like they're quite simple. UE and Midi Control are mostly used for external hardware controllers and, for example, to control a DAW. It's a standardized set of controls where, for example, you can use a Midi controller and the fader is already linked to a fader which is being used by the DAW control, and a rotary is already defined, so you don't have to put in all your MIDI coding yourself. So the MIDI control driver here converts the incoming MIDI signals from your mixer to UE or Midi control. MIDI through is just sending all the raw MIDI messages from A to B. So if your mixer sends out a MIDI command or from a fader, it will appear on your virtual MIDI ports in the same format. And the CC translator translate our sysx messages, because we have so many messages, we are using sysx messages to standardized messages. To make it a bit more easier to understand, so on the left side, the mixer, and on the right side, the DAW or the application you want to use. And the A&H Midi Control is your DAW control, so your Midi or UE, which does the translation. So the purple line is your original MIDI from the D-Live or from the AHM or from the Avantis, and the blue line is translated MIDI. So the mixer communicates with the MIDI control driver, and the MIDI control driver translated to UE or Midi protocol. When you are in MIDI through, the MIDI just goes from A to B, so from the mixer to your DAW application. If you are using CC translator, you are having a translation on your mixer side. So you can choose where you want your translation to be done. If you want to know what's going on your MIDI messages, so you want to sniff or see what's going on, there are multiple services or programs for Mac and PC. For example, MIDI Midi Sniffer for Mac, MIDIOX is a program for Windows, where you can see which messages are coming in and what the values in the channel numbers are. It's quite interesting to have a look at those programs to at least see what's coming in. Another simple program to test if what you're getting in, you want to send it out. Some people use Qlab if you're using a Mac, or any other show control where you can simply type in your coding. So in this case, it's ASCII or your hex coding. And in this case, it's just a simple program which IT people are using to send a serial message to a specific IP address on a specific port. And in this case, we are using TCP/IP instead of UDP. And TCP/IP connection, let's say the difference between a UDP message and a TCP/IP message is that the UDP message is being sent over the network, and the sending party leaves it as it is. And a TCP/IP message asks for an acknowledgement. So did you receive the message? And if the receiving part did not receive the message, the message will be resended. So a TCP/IP message is much securer. It takes a bit longer because you have your acknowledgement, but it's much more secure connection, or not secure connection. It's much more secure transfer from your message from A to B. So packet sender is a program which simply can send a package with payload, your serial string, to one of our mixers, and the mixer will communicate on that one. So getting MIDI in and out of your hardware is not that hard, but what if you want to make a more sophisticated network MIDI system? So we want to control something on stage, something on the front of house. I have some MIDI devices. Maybe I want to have our keyboard player on stage, change some presets. There are some devices which can make that happen. And in this case, a simple one is the Bome box. Who knew? So Bome is a little device which we initially stumbled across on to get from Ethernet to 5-pin MIDI, because there are still people who want to control their old reverb, their PCM60 or whatever. They still want to control it over 5-pin MIDI. But when we had a chat with Florian from Bome, we found out that this little box can do way more. So we got the integration going with Bome and Allen Heath. And so far that right now, the Bome box automatically detects any Allen Heath mixer on the network. So the Bome box is capable of making a complete Ethernet network to control MIDI. And that MIDI can be USB devices, can be Ethernet devices, can be RF devices, can be a computer, can be a keyboard, can be whatever. It can even be another Bome box. So you can create a full MIDI network to get all the devices going. You have an input and an output, and you can simply forward the MIDI message from an input to an output. But what the Bome box can also do is translate the incoming message to something you want on the output. So for example, I have a keyboard coming in, and that keyboard is stroking an R. And then the Bome box can see that R and translate it to mute group 1 on. And then the S is going to be the mute group 1 release. So you can translate keystrokes to MIDI messages or MIDI messages to something else. So it can be a very powerful box to work with. And we had Florian Bomers a little while where we pre-recorded an interview, and we would like to show you this interview. So here we go. Hi, Florian. Thank you for making time for us. How are you?
Hi. Yes, I'm very good, despite the circumstances. Thanks for asking. Thanks for having me.
Great. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and how your company started? Because you made the Bome box, I assume.
Yes, well, it started way early in my children's days when I had a band and we used a lot of MIDI gear. And already then I started programming home computer to be a drum computer. And then at university, I continued programming MIDI software and started selling it on the internet. And noticed, oh, there are others who actually like to pay money for that. So I started my company on around that, and then now it's my full-time job. And right, for a couple of years now, we're also producing hardware, and that is the Bome box that has all the MIDI engine that I programmed for my software before.
Okay, nice. So hardware, software, nice combination there. So what about the Bome box? What can it do? Because we've seen we can connect to Allen Heath devices, we can connect to USB devices, we can do other stuff with it. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Exactly. So the core idea is that you can connect anything MIDI to one box, MIDI DIN devices, or all sorts of USB MIDI devices, synthesizers, keyboards, any controllers, but also network MIDI. So it uses Ethernet to connect to other Bome boxes, to computers, or directly to devices like Allen Heath mixers.
And can I use multiple computers in the system? Can I use a MIDI network, let's say it like that?
Exactly. That's where the fun starts. The Bomebox really doesn't have any limitations. Via a USB hub, you can add up to 32 devices, USB devices, and via network, you're virtually unlimited in the numbers of computers, Bomeboxes, and mixers that you can interconnect. The Bomebox has a very powerful MIDI router built in. So you can define exactly which device is connected, MIDI connected to any other device that you like. By default, everything is just talking to everything. So you will have the full experience, but you can go in there and define easily which device talks to which other device.
That's a nice one. Hey, and the Allen Heath integration, how did we get connected? Why is there a special Allen Heath tab in the Bomebox software?
Well, it was a cooperation because it sort of made sense. The Bomebox has very strong network MIDI capabilities, and the Allen Heath mixers come with a network MIDI out of the box. So to have more USB MIDI and especially MIDI DIN connectivity for mixers, we integrated specific Allen Heath mixer discovery, and also it now, and once it's connected to the Bomebox, it sort of you can leverage all the capabilities, MIDI routing, and connectivity of the Bomebox.
So it can not only do Ethernet MIDI to 5-pin, but we can also do different stuff with it?
Yes. So Ethernet MIDI to 5-pin DIN is one very simple example, but you can also hook up your controllers, like a launch pad or any kind of controller, and connect that with your mixer. You have multiple devices that are merged. You can duplicate streams if you want your mixer to control multiple MIDI devices. That works easily with the Bomebox. And last but not least, there's also a powerful MIDI processing engine in the Bomebox where you can define on a very fine-grained level which MIDI messages should be translated to other MIDI messages or even other protocols.
So if I get it right, you can receive a MIDI message from one device, get it into the Bomebox, and then do something with it, or translate it, or make something different out of it. For example, you were talking about Novation, the Launchpad, which is a simple keyboard thing, which sends out MIDI messages, but you can translate that to trigger something inside an Allen Heath mixer.
Exactly. And I believe a lot of people actually do that, either as a remote control or as sort of an additional way to control your mixer. How it works is we have an editor for Windows and Mac called Midi Translator Pro. And there you can define your mappings and translations. You can also have a little logic in there. Say you can define layers.
Logic, what do you mean by logic? Can you explain what logic can do for us?
Right, with logic, well, it has sort of a built-in scripting language. So you can say, if I press this button, then everything will be sort of on a different layer, sort of a shift function,
Yeah.
or what else could be done? You can define like long presses, basically really redefine what a controller does. Or for a MIDI keyboard, you can define splits, or say when I play this chord, it'll do something else. I mean, basically
Everything.
unlimited ways to mess with your MIDI messages.
That's what I always like to hear. That's a good one. Good one.
Yes. And also, of course, you can do what actually a lot of people do is create multiple presets that you can then switch via MIDI. Say for each song that you're playing on stage, you have one preset, and then within MIDI translator, and then you can define a MIDI message that does the switch. And so you have a lot of possibilities to instantly change everything, change to a new scene, and that works very well, I guess, with Allen Heath mixers.
Yeah, I've seen some. So to give you an idea, a preset is a new set of rules that you can enable or disable. So
Exactly.
So you can do different stuff. Nice, makes it really nice. So it sort of tells us what translator does. Um, also means we can hook up to different brands and different devices. We are sort of, you already touched on it a little bit, but is there any limitation on what we can do there MIDI wise?
So we try not to have any limitations, and as long as a MIDI device conforms to the MIDI specification, it'll work with a Bomebox. So there are a few USB devices that don't use the USB MIDI standard, so they don't work with the Bomebox. But in general, everything just works out of the box. You plug it in, and it's detected by the Bomebox, and then you can either just route it or use it with the processing. Nice. And on a computer, yeah, it also maps into your software, any DAW software via virtual MIDI ports.
Yeah, and I also saw somebody using Innovation Launchpad to trigger OBS, because we're in the age of everything has to go by video. So you can also trigger keyboard shortcuts from an external MIDI device, for example.
Exactly. When you're running the Midi Translator Pro software on a computer, you can use it to for even more things that don't really relate with MIDI, but work very well when you trigger them via MIDI. Like keyboard shortcuts, there are a lot of users who use a MIDI controller to control their video editing, like color grading, or during a live show for the lighting. There are really a lot of different possibilities. One particularly fun use case I've seen on the internet is someone who used the software Midi Translator Pro only for a huge cut off or like panic button. So when he's on a live show and everything goes havoc, he just presses that button, and then Midi Translator emulates the keystrokes for every software that is needed to stop everything.
Smart one. Oh, that's a good one. So Florian, we can use Allen Heath devices as MIDI over Ethernet devices on a network. How does that work? How do they connect to your Bomebox?
So the Allen Heath mixers implement an own discovery protocol, and the Bomebox also implements that. So once you've connected physically via Ethernet your mixer to the Bomebox, you only need to sort of switch on Allen Heath support in the Bomebox configuration, and from then on, it automatically discovers all your Allen Heath mixers that are connected, and creates the MIDI routing, or sort of a stub routing where everything connects to the mixer. If you want to, again, if you want to do your custom routing, you can also go into the MIDI router and kind of really do the routing that you like. But by default, it'll just work out of the box.
Automatically detect. And for example, we have people using the MIDI over Wi-Fi. So what happens if you have a Wi-Fi dropout? Is there a reconnection, or do you need to go into the software and connect it manually?
Okay, so here are two things. First of all, I didn't mention that. Yes, the Bomebox actually has built-in Wi-Fi. So you can use it to connect to a Wi-Fi hotspot, or the Bomebox can be the hotspot, and then connect other devices that have Wi-Fi built in. And when a connection drops, the Bomebox notices that, and when the device comes up again, it'll automatically reconfigures everything as it was before. So that's one of the big promises of the Bomebox. Once you've configured something, it'll always stay like that. You connect your device, it's done. Your power drops and all devices go off. You bring them up again, plug in power, and the Bomebox will continue exactly as where it was before the power outage.
So we can also use it for fallover systems, for example, MIDI fallover devices like that.
Exactly, and that's what we've just released, a tutorial how to set up the Bomebox in a failover configuration, where you have two computers running a DAW or a lighting system, or your scene switcher, and they're both connected to one Bomebox via Ethernet. And the Bomebox then does the connection to your mixer. And the Bomebox automatically detects when one of the computers fails and then switches to the other one. So an automatic failover system.
Yeah, for theaters and stuff like that. Okay, nice. Yeah, and we can find these videos on your YouTube channel, right?
Exactly. We have a YouTube channel for the Bomebox.
Hey, and another question. I know you are promoting it quite a lot. Midi 2.0. So we were on Midi since the Middle Ages somewhere. So Midi 2.0, what is it? Can we use it for our mixers, or what can we do with it?
Right. So Midi 2.0, there's a lot of expectations around that. So one core aspect, and you say I'm marketing it a lot. I'm really trying to educate what it is, and I think the core thing to know is that it builds on Midi 1.0, and Midi 2.0 is actually a number of specifications, and most of them operate on Midi 1.0. So the core difference where Midi 2.0 starts is that you have bi-directional MIDI connections. So a lot of devices have MIDI in and MIDI out already, but the MIDI protocol only uses one direction. So with Midi 2.0, we say, okay, now if you want to do Midi 2.0, you must have MIDI in and out so that devices can get a response, which previously was only possible in a proprietary sense. But and now that you can ask a MIDI device, hey, who are you? What can you do? Tell me all your program names. That makes a huge difference. And with that, Midi 2.0 really works on Midi 1.0 and adds a lot of functionality without a new interface, a new connector, a new sort of underlying protocol.
So it's everything the same. And then if I understand correctly, you can also ask the device what it's capable of, or what its components are. Yeah?
Exactly. There are two parts of that. It's called profiles. That's on a high level. Do you support the mixer profile? Do you support the guitar amplifier profile? You can imagine a lot of profiles that will be defined. That's now going on in the MIDI association, a lot of specification work to create all these profile definitions. And on a lower level, you have the so-called property exchange, where you can ask on a fine-grained level a device, which channels do you use? Where do you receive? Which channels do you send? And what I said, what are your program names? What are your controller names? What is the range of controllers? You know, a lot of very useful stuff for auto configuration in DAWs and intermediate software like Midi Translator Pro. So the other thing that everybody thinks MIDI 2.0 would be is an actual new protocol, a new packet format. And that is also coming. It's standardized. I don't think there are any devices out there right now, but we should soon see new devices. The protocol is called UMP, Universal MIDI Packet, and that will bring all the good stuff that people are waiting for 20, 30 years. More controllers, higher resolutions, more channels. You name it, and you got it in there.
And you were saying it's on top of MIDI 1. So does it also mean we can use the Bome box to apply MIDI 2.0 to Allen Heath devices?
Glad you're asking. Yes, we've just released a new firmware for the Bome box. Every Bome box owner can download it and upgrade the Bome box. And it is one of the first devices on the market that now has MIDI 2.0 functionality. In particular, we've added property exchange. We thought that would be a very good start for a connection box. It allows the user to define your property exchange mappings for MIDI 1.0 devices. If you connect your Allen Heath mixer, it may not have MIDI 2.0 functionality at this time. So the Bome box can do that part in place of the mixer. I call it a MIDI 2.0 proxy. So when the DAW, a MIDI 2.0 capable DAW, asks the Bome box, hey, which devices do you have? And then it says, hell, here I have a Launchpad and I have an Allen Heath mixer. These are the names. And then the DAW can ask the Bome box all the capabilities, the properties, channels, controllers, and which node numbers it uses. And the Bome box replies for the actual device.
Nice. So it's a sort of intermediary for 2.0 devices then.
Exactly. So that's the MIDI 2.0 proxy that we've just released for the Bome box.
Nice one. Hey, I can see you can do a lot of complicated configurations with the Bome box, and you can use it as a small logic stuff. You can use it as a translator to get from one device to another. You just released new firmware. What are the new features in there? Even more stuff.
We have just released a number of updates to MIDI Translator, which adds a lot of functionality to dynamically react on changes. Say you plug in a device, so now your translator definitions can dynamically react to that. Say you have multiple devices and you have one spare, but it's a different, say you have a big Launchpad and a small Launchpad, and and when you're live, you don't know exactly which one you will plug in. Then you can set up your translations to dynamically react on which device you plug in. And also dynamic routing inside the translation set. That's also one of the new functions that will hopefully make a big difference for users.
So Florian, people can do weird things. They can make it themselves very complicated, or in some cases they want to do stuff which they don't know how to do. How's your support system? How can they get in touch with your team?
Right. So we really try to have the best support possible. You can contact us directly, but our preferred way is the forum, where we answer all users' questions and their requests, how to set up their particular situation. So as you say, every user has the possibility with the Bomebox and the MIDI translation engine to really streamline their what they envision for their setup. But sometimes it's difficult to implement, and that's where we come in and assist you up to the point where you're able to do everything on your own from then on. So we really also try to teach and not only tell you how it's done.
Yeah. So education is I think the most important one in there.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
And of course, when it comes to the combination of Allen and Heath and the Bomebox, we are not really Allen and Heath experts. We know how to connect Allen and Heath devices to the Bomebox and how to configure it there. But once it gets to Allen and Heath specific questions, we may tell you that it's probably better to ask Allen and Heath than for that.
And that's why we are here, and we have also people who can tell you a bit more about MIDI.
Yes.
Okay. Hey, Florian, thank you very much. We're going to do some examples, which we're going to show in this webinar. You are here for the Q&A, I think, in the end. So if people have questions for you, you are there to answer them.
Yes.
Cool.
I am.
Florian, thank you, and I hope to see you next time in real life.
Yes, indeed. Thanks for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So we're back again. Hope you enjoyed that one. Florian is with us. So in the end, if you want to ask questions, feel free to do so. So I've made a simple example to use an SQ as a fader wing for a D-Live system, or the other way around, where we use the SQ as an input to the Bomebox. We use translator to translate those MIDI commands to something the D-Live will understand. And then we can move it forward. In the SQ, there's a nice feature which you can use on the faders, where you can make the faders linear or logarithmic, where linear is for a lot of DAWs very easy to use. So they will just give a value from 0 to 127 divided over the fader. And if you go to logarithmic, there is more definition in the -10, +10 area, where if it's not logarithmic, that's just going to get loud. So in this case, we are using an SQ with the Bomebox. We have created some rules and regulations, presets, where in our case, we have created channel 1 to 12 from SQ to D-Live, and channel 1 to 12 from D-Live to SQ. So for example, if we want to turn one way off, we can turn one way off. And the simple thing is that we simply set, in this case, channel 1 to 12 in the rules, so the translator rules. We will say channel 1 fader, the incoming trigger, and the outgoing action. And we want the incoming trigger to be swallowed, so we don't retransmit what the SQ is sending out over the network. And this is the rule itself. This is the rule highlighted, so we can see this is the MIDI message coming in, where on SQ, this is your incoming message, and this is the fader value, which we have set variable for. And the QQ variable is only going to stay in this rule. So we can use the QQ variable for all these rules. And as you can see, we have used it for all these rules because they're going to stay inside that rule. They're not going to go out there. Then we don't have any translations. We can say we want to add 10 dB value, or subtract 10 dB value or whatever. And then the outgoing MIDI message is a system exclusive message, again, with the message for the D-Live, with the value, which is variable from the SQ input. So fader input and fader output to the D-Live. And of course, on the D-Live to SQ, we do it the other way around. And the nice thing is because the D-Live and the SQ are based on a networked system. So for example, on D-Live, we allow you to do 40 connections at the same time. On SQ, to be honest, I don't really know. Because it's networked, you don't get any echoing. Because normally if you would send the fader to move, it would also send out a message to move the other fader, and you could get into a feedback loop. Because everything is based on a network, you don't get that feedback loop on the system. So what's the result? So here on the left, we see the faders moving, and we see the D-Live faders also moving. This is all done over network, over MIDI messages, and you can see how quick it is. That's a nice thing about MIDI. It's originally meant to be music notes, so it has to be quick over the MIDI network. A nice thing to do when you don't have a D-Live system or an Avantis or whatever system with you, with SQ it doesn't work, it's only a D-Live and Avantis, you can use the MIDI control driver, which I showed you in the beginning, to use the link local address when you are running D-Live or Avantis Director. D-Live and Avantis Director run a sort of offline engine inside the software, and you can point your MIDI driver to the D-Live software, and then it will send and receive the same MIDI messages if you would point it out to a D-Live mixer system or an Avantis mixer system. So this is ideal when you want to be at home and want to start testing stuff, or you want to prep your system and you don't have a mixer system with you. You can set it up like this at home. And to be honest, an SQ or a Q is small enough to put in the back of your car, so it's easier to have one live on the table. Then one thing that Florian said in the interview, which I found a very interesting one, there is a link in the chat window, is the full over system from Bome. So some people were asking about Rtp Midi, which is a protocol that's used by Apple, which has the ability to do redundant MIDI streams over a network. So with the Bome box, you can create the same thing. The only advantage you have, so if, for example, you want to have two computers running a show control, controlling one mixer system, or two mixer systems, you want to have a full over system. So with the Bome box, you can create that full over system from one system to take over the next system, or you can even automatically switch the inputs from a mixer system if your backing track DAW is falling over and you want to switch to another one which is on stage, for example. Both Dante and MIDI are then very nice tools to create your system. You can find this video on YouTube. The link is in the chat window. If you're not in the chat window, you can see you have to type this nice little coding over. I think that was mainly it for today. So we have some Q&A, and I think Florian is with us. I would like to thank you for your time. And if you do have questions, you can go to the Bome support forum or to the Allen Heath forum, or send out a ticket to us or see us on our forums. There is one webinar coming up this Thursday, and please keep an eye out on all our webinars on the session page to see which webinars are coming out. Oh, Florian, did you have any questions left?
Yes, thanks for asking. Hi, everyone. I just have one correction. Unfortunately, We did release a new firmware, as mentioned in the interview, but unfortunately, we had to pull out the MIDI 2 support for now. It's still available as a beta version. You can contact us if you're interested in that. I just wanted to clarify that there's sort of a mismatch of the interview, which we recorded before the actual release, and what happened afterwards. It was sort of more of a political decision, but we will definitely provide MIDI 2.0 support in a future firmware update.
Everyone, thank you very much for your time. Florian, again, thank you very much for your time. And we hope to see you on the next webinar. Ciao.
Thanks, everyone.